Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, aloha, love tribe. Welcome to Bitcoin for Peace podcast. I have somebody here who is on a mission to orange pill the world, and she's helping women understand Bitcoin specifically. This is Krista Edmunds. Welcome, Krista. How are you?
Hello. Such an honor to be your first guest on the revamped podcast. I'm very honored and privileged to be the first one. Thank you.
So excited, and how cool that we're both women and you've got Access Tribe. So let's go just dive right in. I want to just like dive right into who you are and what's your new mission right now on planet Earth.
Wow. Okay, that's a big one. Yeah. Well, so gosh, I have like a 20-year background in TradFi. So I worked in various different companies in London and New York in the financial markets industry. And most recently, I was at an investment bank in the sales division. And the last job I did when I was there was corporate innovation. So for about 3 years, I was managing a team that was doing corporate innovation within the bank and running their accelerator program for North America. And then I guess it was like sort of summer 2021. So it had been early August. I'd resigned from the bank and I was looking into what I could do next in my career. And we were planning a move from New York over to Canada. And I had a bunch of colleagues that had gone off to work in the crypto industry. And I was really interested just to understand why everybody seemed to be going and working for a crypto company. And I thought that understood Bitcoin quite well. So I'm embarrassed to say I found out about Bitcoin. I think it was sometime in 2011. And it was my husband who said there's this amazing thing. It's this distributed ledger. And I was like, God, that sounds so boring. And I think I even read the white paper and I was like, this is excruciating. Like, what is this thing? And so he was busy working on a project with a friend of his related to Bitcoin. And I was just kind of like, okay, whatever. I'm not terribly interested in this. And then I guess it was probably fast forward around 2015, probably when Ethereum came out. There was a lot of buzz about it in just the fintech slash innovation space. And so I started going to a few meetups in like New York and various different things and looking into it. And I was just like, this just doesn't seem that interesting. And the banks were really actively starting to look at blockchain projects. So there were lots of investments going in various like private blockchains and things like that. And so I had kind of thought that I understood the technology reasonably well. It would come up very often in conversations about, innovation and efficiencies that we were trying to drive in the bank. And it was really only in beginning of August 2021 when I actually told my mum, I was like, I don't want to go and work in a bank again. I want to do something different with my life. And I'm kind of going to start looking into crypto. And so she sent me this interview that Jordan Peterson had done with a bunch of Bitcoiners. And if people want to look it up, it's called The Future of Money, question mark. And it's an interview with Robert Breedlove, John Vallis, Richard James, the Australian filmmaker, and Dajiji, the pseudonymous, I think German Bitcoiner. Anyway, this thing's about 90 minutes long. And I watched it, and my mum hadn't watched it, by the way, but she's a big Jordan Peterson fan. So she was all excited about this. And I was just like, why is Jordan Peterson interviewing a bunch of Bitcoiners? Like, this is so out of his wheelhouse. So anyway, I watched this thing, and the next day she calls me up and she said, "Oh, have you watched it yet? Is it any good? Should I watch it?" And I was just like, it's completely changed my life. And she's like, "What?" And I just said to her, "I've been in financial markets for 20 years. I've understood nothing about money." And I was like, I am just completely blown away that I also understood nothing about Bitcoin.
Goosebumps right here, like just listening. People, I'm sure on this path now that you've been on, like I've been myself too, like it's so humbling to think like I've been an entrepreneur, I understand finance, I understand investing, but I didn't understand money. And that,
Yeah.
and you think like, wow, how many of us are there that are in that same boat? Like I would say the majority of people, that.
I totally agree. And it's the weirdest thing. I've told a lot of people about this. I remember early in my career, I was working at Bloomberg and they used to invest a lot in training their staff. Like we'd have a huge amount of, I mean, the Bloomberg terminal itself has lots of courses on it, but you get lots of in-person training as well as part of your day-to-day job. And I remember sitting in an economics session and asking the teacher, she was talking about inflation. And I just said, why, we were studying interest rates and, hedging and various different things and talking about inflation. And I said to her, why is it that we have inflation? Like, why is it necessary? And she sort of looked at me, she said, well, it's because people keep asking for higher wages. This was somebody that had a degree in economics. And I remember at the time thinking, this is kind of an odd thing because, like, people, as they get more experienced, get paid more based on their experience. But there's a whole cohort of people coming in who are inexperienced, who are on lower wages. And you've got a whole cohort of people retiring who are no longer drawing a wage. So as the wages go up, eventually those people kind of come off the production line and a new set of people come on who are on lower wages. So her explanation didn't make a lot of sense to me, but I had never heard any alternative. And the whole kind of financial system is sort of predicated on this, I guess, like chasing yield, really. It's like trying to outrun inflation. And nowhere at any time did anyone ever discuss like the role of money printing in that trajectory. You have lots of deep in-depth conversations about one financial instrument's, efficacy versus another, but very little about like the entire ecosystem that you're existing in. Have you seen that meme? I always bring up this meme, but it's like, the goldfish swimming in the bowl, and one of them turns around and says, how's the water today? And the other one turns around and says, what's water? It's like that. You just exist in this thing and you just never question like the whole premise on which it's constructed. And so, yes, I mean, I'll be honest with you, it was kind of like, it was a weird moment for me in my life history, if you like, because part of it was just like, oh my God, I felt like I'd just discovered, I don't know, like the Rosetta Stone or, Mount Fire coming down from the mountain or something. But the other part of it is like your entire sort of sense of self and, what your life has been constructed on just completely falls apart. It's like, oh my God, I've spent 20 years of my life in an industry that is like nonsense,
It's very, I would imagine it was destabilizing for you mentally. I wrote a piece called The Bitcoiner's Dilemma, and I talk about, people's worldview having to be shattered as they become Bitcoiners and how destabilizing that is mentally and relationally. Your relationships shift also, because once you start to get this truth serum, all of a sudden you're like, well, what else don't I know? And you start questioning things, and you start surrounding yourself with other people who are Bitcoiners as well, who are questioning the world and questioning others, forms of governance, other forms of how we operate as a society, right? And so we feel naked, I know I felt
yeah.
when this happened, because I was just like, and I still kind of do, because the people in my life, my closest family, everybody, they're still not Bitcoiners, and they think I'm insane. And I'm like, it's okay. It's just math with a lot of impact in all of these segments, obviously. And that's why I'm choosing this piece tangent, to dive into, because it does, if we do not have sound money, we have the ability for these governments to go print, get guns, war, death. That's one avenue, or other people don't have an opportunity to engage and participate in, cross-border trade, or they don't have bank accounts. So all of these things that Bitcoin solves for, like when you don't have financial security and stability in your life, your physical and mental health is compromised greatly.
Yeah.
Like a huge cause of health problems. When people are struggling and stressed out, they're working many jobs, they're fearful of what's going to happen next. So inflation really is brutal on so many levels, and Bitcoin really does address a lot of these issues. No, there's no one, panacea of perfect, solution, but it does touch on a lot of these things. So in your experience so far, now that you've been in, the rabbit hole for these last few years, like what's really changed for you personally?
Oh my God. Wow. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think I definitely can relate to what you said about just the disintegration of your worldview and how it's difficult. And actually, it's funny when you say that. I hadn't really thought about that, but it is a bit like when you have therapy. Like, I mean, I did quite a lot of therapy when I was younger. And I remember having some quite dark moments as it was becoming effective, because the image that I had of myself started to disintegrate, and the person that I thought that I was not actually who I was. And it was quite a horrible realization in many ways, because you sort of construct this persona, I guess, that you think that you are. And when you peel the layers of the onion back and discover that that persona is not who you thought it was, it's just not a very pleasant. I always say this to people when they talk about going into therapy. I'm like, you should absolutely do it. It's a fantastic thing to do. But I promise you, it's not an enjoyable experience. This isn't you go to somebody's office and you talk about stuff and you feel better when you walk out. You generally feel a lot worse when you walk out.
It's so true. Oh my gosh. So I know that our sense of identity, like when I was, after my divorce, I started doing 12-step program. I went to rehab, all this crazy shit happened, right? Fell apart, all this. And, what I did in the 12-step program, and they're like, the first thing you say when you walk in the door is, I'm an alcoholic, or I'm a drug addict, or I'm a sex addict, or whatever the identity is, right? And there's your sticker. And that just never felt correct with me, because it felt like, okay, if that's my identity, then how am I ever going to grow and block somebody who's healed? And that was just a coping mechanism, right? And so it just continued to keep me so small. And I remember going to a Tony Robbins event, Tony Robbins. So he was talking about just the need for humans to stay consistent with their identity is massive, right? And so when we start not being consistent with our identity, then we start having those worldviews collapse. We start having mental and spiritual, emotional collapses. And sometimes we need to have those in order for this truth to come out of.
Yeah.
But like most of us do go around with a mask and not even knowing we created this mask for ourselves, because it's a societal mask, it's a political mask, it's a religious mask, it's a familial, generational mask. And then all of a sudden you're like, who the fuck is this? It's not me, and then you get faced with the mirrors, when you're doing this work. And so Bitcoin
Definitely.
is truth for a lot of us, and it's like, whoa.
But I think this is exactly it. And Bitcoin almost does that as at a macro level. So, but it also does it at a micro level. I mean, to be honest, I think it does also make you start confronting things about yourself again. And so then you're going through like a personal transformation, and you're starting to look at the world in a different view. I mean, I think that was a really difficult thing for me, was just the realization that I'd got to my 40s and the world that I thought that I lived in has never existed. And it's a very strange feeling. I mean, I think that comparison of being pulled out of the Matrix, it's funny, actually. I remember watching the Matrix when it came out, and I was living in Italy at the time. And I remember going to the cinema and seeing it and walking out and thinking to myself, actually, I remember that scene where Keanu Reeves is in the office, and there's that sort of voiceover and it's saying, do you ever feel like things don't make sense, like like something's. And I remember watching it then and thinking, oh my god, do other people feel that too? I feel that all the time. I walk around and I'm like, something's not right here, like this doesn't make any sense. And it's funny because in some ways Bitcoin gives you the answers, but it also gives you a whole bunch of other questions. But there is that very painful process where your image of the world that you're existing on, or the water that you're swimming in, is suddenly just completely pulled apart. And yeah, it's quite a scary, sort of disturbing experience. And also it just made me very sad. I mean, I think getting to know the Bitcoin community made me very happy, because I discovered some really like high integrity people that really sort of, whose really whole mission is just to make the world a better place, and they're, risking everything to do that. But at the same time, you start looking around you and you just think, gosh, this world is actually incredibly corrupt and dysfunctional to a much greater extent than one had imagined. And then you also have this experience where everybody in your life is operating at surface level. I have these very strange conversations with friends where, like, I don't know, they will raise some issue that they're terribly upset about, and it's something just massively trivial. And I just find myself going like, it's almost like your house is burning down and you're worried about what color wallpaper you've got and whether you should redo the walls. It's that kind of thing. And so that causes a lot of problems, I think, in personal relationships, because when you're not hanging out with Bitcoiners, you just feel like you're sort of in zombie land. Yeah.
No, oh my gosh. And it's, people, have you ever had any of your normie friends just say like, Bitcoin's a cult. Like all the people are yeah, I've heard that word many times. And I'm like, there's no leader though. Like cults have leaders, and
Yeah, I would say fiat's a cult.
it's seriously, it's so powerful and hopeful and optimistic. And it's also like exactly what you said, Krista. Like you get that like, whoa, the the Wizard of Oz, the veil has been removed, and you're like, oh, is this how this stuff is working? And this is who's got the strings. Like, and still to this day, I mean, I don't know who's holding the strings. Something tells me there's some string holders, some puppeteers that are out. We're not really privy to. There's all these conspiracy theories, but the more deeper I become a Bitcoiner, the more all these conspiracy theories become true.
Yeah, I think somebody put a thing out a few months ago. They said I no longer call them conspiracy theories. I call them spoiler alerts.
Right? Oh my gosh. It's seriously, it's
Yeah.
difficult, and do you have kids?
No, I don't have kids. No.
I was talking to my kids the other day, and they, of course, anytime mommy brings up Bitcoin, they're like, oh God, mom, in the car driving home, and they're like, don't bring it up. And they're like doing this to each other and like, don't make her touch. She's going to go off again and talk some more, But I got, because okay, guys, I've been doing the rebrand. I'm ready. And it's just going to be Bitcoin for peace. And they're like, ah. And I'm like, don't you guys get it? And I'm like, I'm doing this for you and your future. Like, you don't understand what you're up against. I'm like, you're inheriting this toxic, cancerous system of fiat, and my daughter's, of course, in high school economics and learning Keynesian economics. And she's like, we need inflation, mom. We need to print them, all this stuff. And I'm just like, ah. So it's
Wow.
I have to, like you said, we have to, it's like being calm when we're talking to people who haven't gotten it yet, because it's just, they don't understand. And I think it's just staying humble and having a cool attitude, but you've got to plug in with Bitcoiners a lot to stay sane, I think. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I mean, for me, it's been an interesting journey. So I think there was like the initial horror of like, oh my God, being unplugged and having to reevaluate your entire life journey. And then there was the phase of just like, all I want to do is hang out with Bitcoiners and talk about all these things and learn as much as I can. And I think I've now got to the phase where I'm a little bit more like, I kind of want to go back into my old world and just start like really spending time with people in that world and understanding where they're at with this stuff. So I think for me, it's been a little bit of a journey like that, because I do feel like we're at an inflection point now where, we're really at the precipice of like mass adoption. And there are still so many people that don't understand this and have not gotten off zero. So they own zero Bitcoin and still don't understand why that's important. And I don't know about you. I feel like I'm in a little bit of a race against the clock. There's a part of me that's like the universe is unfolding as it should, and there's the other part of me that's like the little white rabbit going, "We're running out of time. We're late. We're late."
It's one of those things that's like the universe is unfolding as it should. And as an actor in the universe, we're actors in this play, right? And so it's like, I feel like our job is to continue to take action, move forward, do the best we can to, share knowledge when people are interested in knowledge, and not, you can't shove it down their throats. But I think, yeah, it is unfolding, and we're also part of the action of the unfolding, at the same time.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny. I was talking to somebody the other day about this on my podcast. It was Aileen Osorio. She's just recently joined the Human Rights Foundation. um,
God, yes.
Yeah, she's great. I mean, we had such an interesting conversation, but I was sort of saying to her that, like, I don't know about you, but I said, I feel like I'm on this roller coaster and I'm just barely hanging on. So there's a part of me that kind of feels like I'm doing a lot of stuff. There's the other part of me that just feels like I'm being taken on this ride and it's moving at like breakneck speed. And I'm just barely able to cling on to this thing happening, because it just feels as if like the world is just, I don't know. I like, if you'd asked me like 5-10 years ago, 2 years ago, I would have said to you that I felt like I had more agency over my life than I do now. And right now I feel very much like I'm just sort of going along for this ride and doing what I'm being told. Is it maybe not being told? That sounds very sort of, whatever, but it's just like these things just keep happening, and I seem to be being taken down a path that is inevitable. And if I try and get off the path, it's impossible. And so I just sort of have to go along with it.
Right. And so let me ask you this. So you said you're being told. Does that reflect on like a spiritual, like you're following the messages and the signs that keep coming to you? Or I want to unpack that just a tiny bit.
Yeah, I guess, I mean, gosh, I mean, I grew up in a Christian household, but I certainly wouldn't consider myself a Christian. I mean, I would say I was really more borderline atheist, or at least agnostic, for a very long period of time. But it's interesting to me because I think one thing that I have kind of come to appreciate is that, we have much less control over what goes on in our lives in the world than we think we do. And that there is some higher kind of purpose. I mean, gosh, I'm so not this kind of a person, by the way. I'm much more pragmatic in general, but it's like there's some kind of higher purpose. And I've actually like got to the point now where I've started praying and just going, just give me guidance, take me in the right direction. And I don't know what I'm praying to or who I'm praying to, but I've just kind of come to the conclusion that I have far less control over these things than I think I do. And I'm here for some kind of purpose that is beyond my monkey brain comprehension. So I just try and put out good vibes, do the right thing as best I can, and just kind of give it up to some kind of higher power. And so it's like some irony. Like my dad, it's funny because my dad and I have had this like quite fractious relationship throughout our lives, and he's a preacher, he's a very committed Christian and has been for his whole life, a born again Christian.
Oh, wow.
So he sends me books about God all the time, and I now send him books back about Bitcoin and God, because I to my delight, I discovered that there are all these Christian Bitcoiners. And so I'm like, oh, great, if I can just orange pill him. So he's read the Fiat Standard, he's read the Bitcoin Standard, he's read Thank God for Bitcoin. I think I sent him for his birthday recently the Bitcoin Evangelism book that I think it was Pastor Bitcoin. No, was it Brian DeMint or Pastor Bitcoin wrote? Anyway, that one. And so we've got this exchange of books going on, but it's interesting because I think he's very puzzled by the fact that I'm suddenly interested in all these godlike topics, because of becoming interested in Bitcoin, which is, I mean, again, if you'd said this to me 2 years ago, I'd have laughed at you and gone like, what?
I know. I'm going to have I know it's so bizarre. All that again, it's like these little lights almost on the, but remember the light bright boards when you're a kid and you put the little pegs in the lights? It's like Bitcoin that does all these little light up things, and it starts to paint this picture for you of a different world, and I didn't realize that there's maybe some kind of cosmic spiritual something that is going to get activated in me now that I'm learning about Bitcoin, and like, it's fascinating. And so I think just having that open mind, beginner's mind, is such an important way to look at the world in general, whether you're not. I think it just helps us to remember, like, we don't know what we don't know. And so to be reminded of that when we get new information. So instead of just being like, it's like, okay, all right, okay.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say I'm definitely I mean, I've always been fairly open-minded, but I definitely I don't know, it's just weird to me because if I think back to 2 years ago, my life was so different and my mindset was so different. And I sort of think to myself, gosh, if this can have happened in 2 years, driven by a technology that I already knew about and just didn't understand, and it has so radically changed my life. I mean, at this point, anything could happen. So I'm just a bit kind of like, okay, well, I guess we'll just take this ride and see where it comes. But yeah, I mean, so the kind of journey for me then after this was that I then, had had this experience with this podcast episode with Jordan Peterson. Thank you, Jordan Peterson, for orange pilling me along with my mother. And then I started listening to Robert Breedlove's podcast and just happened to pick the Jeff Booth series as the first one I listened to, just coincidentally. So then I read The Price of Tomorrow, and then I was really like, oh my God, like that was just now I get the whole inflation thing and all the rest of it. And so then by that point, I'd moved to Canada, and there was a meetup in Toronto that was a Bitcoin meetup. And I basically contacted them and I just said, can I come and volunteer for you guys just to learn about Bitcoin and understand this industry? Then I did Pomp's crypto course, and that was like a 3-week sort of intensive, pretty much full-time course. I met a whole bunch of Bitcoin maxis, and that was actually like really nice for me because I suddenly had this community of people. It was just really wonderful. And through that, I discovered things like I discovered the Bitcoin Standard, which I hadn't read. I discovered like Lynn Alden, all of these kind of things were opened up to me, and I managed to kind of really accelerate my learning. And then I joined a UK company that was standing up the UK's first Bitcoin conference. And so I worked for them for 6 months. And then out of that was spawned basically Bitcoin Policy UK, which was the UK's first Bitcoin policy organization. So I co-founded that. I've recently resigned from that. So we hired a CEO, and I was running the next gen pillar, which was to support a talent pipeline for the UK. And so we've got a fantastic guy called Matt Hall, who's a UK teacher who's taken that position. But the organization is basically focusing on mining and sustainability, policy, and the talent pipeline. So yeah, so it just kind of took over my life. And in the midst of all of that, when I was working in banking, I had this idea that I'd been incubating for a long time. Basically what had happened was I had discovered at some point in my career, I think it was like November 2014, I think it was, I discovered about board participation, and our women's network at the bank had brought this organization in the UK that was, I think it's actually called Women on Boards. And what they do is they have a database of board positions, and they provide training on how to participate on a board. And their whole kind of mission is to get more women onto boards. And I remember going to this session and just like, it was mind blown. I was like, what do you mean? You don't need to have gone through a C-suite to sit on a board. Like, this thing is accessible to just, normal people in normal jobs. And then as I was looking at the type of stuff that they were teaching, I was like, oh my God, like, we've got in the bank, we have research analysts, we've got people involved in strategic investments. Like, there was all this kind of suite of skills that we had internally at the company. And I'm like, I could basically just get these people to teach us some of this stuff. And so I started this little like focus group, I guess if you want to call it, with like my female friends in my division. And I just said to them, do you guys want to come and do a session like for 1 hour with this person, learning about how to read a balance sheet, or like, how companies are structured and how boards operate, or things like that. And then it just kind of grew and grew. And I went from having like 5 of us to having 30 people coming to like every session. And then I went to the women's network and I just said, this is becoming unmanageable for me, like doing it off the side of my desk. Can you help? And they were like, yeah, we'll just roll it up into one of our programs. And then I moved to New York. And so I carried on, like, internally, I made an internal move, and then I just carried on doing it in New York as well. So it kind of became a global program. But in the midst of all of that, I was thinking to myself, gosh, if like I didn't know, and by the way, within a year of me having that information, I got my first board seat. And so I was like, okay, so just merely knowing that this thing was an option opened up these doors to me. So I was like, I wonder if this could be done for all careers. And so I had this idea for Access Tribe, which was basically to create a careers app for women that would inspire them about certain careers, educate them, like give them the training that they need, and then connect them to opportunities in that space. And so that was what I started working on sort of like early last year. And then obviously, as I went further down the Bitcoin rabbit hole, I was like, well, I don't care about the other careers. I only care about Bitcoin, and I only want to focus on that. And so the whole thing just really morphed more into like a content platform for women focused on Bitcoin. And so I launched a member platform in September and ran a female founder course just to see how many female founders were out there that maybe didn't have Bitcoin skills or wanted to kind of gain more skills. And yeah, I mean, that's kind of what I'm focused on with that really now, is just doing speaker events for members, providing content for them, education. Yeah, so these are just like some of the courses that are available. There's the full female founder one, which was every business will be a Bitcoin business, which I passionately believe, by the way, like in the same way that every Bitcoin is every business is an internet business. I think Bitcoin, the blockchain, the Bitcoin network is going to underpin everything for every company. So I think it's super important for people to learn about that. And yeah, that was really the genesis of it. And the other thing as well was that, I mean, I just noticed that there weren't that many women in the space, and women seemed to really appreciate having a community that was very, specific to them, like a space where they could get together. And so that was really the genesis of just trying to kind of create somewhere where we could all get together. We could learn about Bitcoin. People that weren't familiar with Bitcoin could learn about it without feeling, I guess, intimidated by these very deeply technical conversations. And yeah, that's kind of where we're at. So I have the podcast where I primarily interview women in Bitcoin. I do talk to men as well, but I've only had 2 on of the 30 episodes that I've done. And I just wanted to create this space where women could get together and learn about Bitcoin and drive Bitcoin adoption. And it's actually been great. There's a bunch of people across the platform that have got together. They've got various business projects going on that they're working on. They've met other Bitcoiners in the space, which has been fantastic. And I think actually, I want to say, was that how I met you? I can't remember. I think we spoke briefly at Bitcoin Miami because you were presenting there. So I think that was actually where I met you, and then we connected afterwards. I can't remember if I reached out to you or you reached out to me, but somehow we got connected. So
Nice video of the DJing, and I was like, thank you so much. That was so you to do that. I was like, wow.
yeah, that was awesome actually, that set, because I knew that you were a DJ. I'd just never actually seen you DJ, and I was like, oh my God, that was at the closing party, wasn't it, that you were doing it? Yeah.
Yes, that was really fun. I was like, oh my gosh. So Bitcoiners can
Yeah.
too. So
It's
okay,
funny.
yeah. Ask you a question about the women though. Obviously, this is a very male heavy sector, right? Bitcoin, crypto, particularly Bitcoin over crypto. I think crypto in general, that's just not, I'm a hardcore Bitcoiner, not a crypto person, but because of all the art and all the other stuff that, a lot of the NFTs and all the other nonsense, sorry guys, but it's a JPEG. And so I mean, that's how I got into Bitcoin, was because of NFTs, because of the Beeple sale, and I was like, who the hell's giving $69 million to someone for a JPEG? Like, what the hell is this? And so I was excited because I thought, oh, cool, this would be a cool tool for artists and musicians and creators to monetize their work in a cool way, and etc. So I think, whatever, if you want to go sell a rock to somebody and they want to give you some money for it, and that's great, go ahead, sell a rock. Who am I to tell you what to go, buy and sell in the world? So I want free markets, right? So, but the women though, there's not a ton of us women in Bitcoin, and what do you think is the barrier? Number one, for women, why isn't there more women? And number two, just mass adoption. Like, why aren't we at?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the unfortunate thing with the lack of women in the Bitcoin space is it's not the men keeping the women out, it's the women keeping themselves out. And that is something that I just find deeply upsetting and deeply frustrating. And it was interesting actually, because I was at the Thank God for Bitcoin conference, the prequel to the Miami conference, I guess. And I was actually chatting to Luke Broyles. He's the guy that just like seemingly came out of nowhere, the real estate agent or something. And he's like all over like the whole Bitcoin ecosystem now. But I saw him at the conference and I just approached him to say hi, like fangirl. I love your stuff. Hi. And I was chatting to him about Access Tribe, and I said, I'm trying to crack this nut of trying to get more women into this space. And he said to me, well, why do you think that is? And I said, well, I think that women are more risk aware. And so they're evaluating the space. And he said to me, well, I think it's actually more that like men tend to score higher on the disagreeable scale. So on a bell curve, it's like the women are much more agreeable and the men are much more disagreeable. So they're more likely to go into something that's a new technology, or where the environment is very kind of, I don't want to say argumentative, but there's like a high sort of debate culture, I guess. There's a lot of kicking around, testing, kicking the tires of ideas and so on. And when he said it, the penny just dropped, because I was like, oh my God. Like, I think it was January last year, I did that Jordan Peterson. He's got this course that he does where he teaches you about psychology, and it's all kind of structured on the 5 behaviors structure of the personality tests. So he's a big believer in the 5 behaviors structure. And when you start the course, the first thing that you do is you do a personality test. So So my personality test came back and I scored, I want to say it was like 70, I might be misremembering the number of this, but I think it was 72% on empathy. So I scored reasonably high on empathy, but I scored 1% on politeness. Like, so I'm like highly on the disagreeable scale. And I was like, oh my God, this is why I come into the Bitcoin ecosystem and I love it. I think the debates are really exciting. I love like the testing of ideas. I don't find it like upsetting in any way. but I was like, this is why I can't get my girlfriends interested. And I would show them stuff on Twitter. I'd send them like screenshots of Greg Foss's tweets, and they'd be like, oh my God, this is terrible. This is why no women want to go into Bitcoin. And I'm like, oh, I read that and I thought it was really funny.
I know. So it's fascinating. Like, I don't know, I know you're on Instagram, but like if you go to these other channels, there's no snarkiness, there's none of it. And you're just like when you go into Bitcoin Twitter, you're like, or X now, whatever. It's like, yay, so there's this, there's a sarcastic sassiness. It's rebellious because
Yeah.
there's a more of a rebel attitude, because we're like, again, once that veil gets lifted, you're just like, what, and there's a sense of outrage to a certain degree, and so you just kind of, it gets your feathers ruffled, right? And
Yeah. Well, it was funny because a couple of nights later, so I'm having dinner with it was a couple of people from Jan 3, and I think it was the head of marketing, who's a really, really cool guy, by the way. He's from El Salvador, but I was chatting to him and I was telling him about Access Tribe, and he just looked at me and he said to me, I think you're wasting your time. And I'm like, really, why? And he said, I think you're wasting your time. Like, if women don't want to come into this space, and they're not going to, and they'll just come in where they want to. And I said to him, well, like, so we had a whole conversation about the whole disagreeable thing. And I said, and I said, I had a conversation with somebody in the angel investment space who runs a US wide angel investment group. And I said, she was really interested about Bitcoin because they didn't have it on their radar as an investment, investing in companies that are in the Bitcoin space. And I said, so I'm presenting to their angel investor network in a couple of weeks. And then he sort of paused and he said, oh, he said, yeah, maybe you're right. He said, if you go for people in that segment who are high on the openness scale and high on the disagreeable scale, which investors and founders tend to be, he's like, that actually might be a good way to bring more people in. And I had been thinking, should I start a fund maybe to invest in Bitcoin women's, female founded Bitcoin companies? And I ran an accelerator program when I was in banking. And so I was like, oh my God, yes, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to run an accelerator program for women in the Bitcoin space. And so that was really the genesis of doing that. And I did this mini program because I was like, I want to test this thesis and see, are there actually any women out there that would even sign up for this, which they did. And so then I was like, okay, well, that's the ecosystem that I probably need to focus my energies on. And when the other women see that this is normalized and it's becoming, there's wider adoption, they will just naturally start to take interest and come into this space. So yeah, I mean, it's fascinating. But I mean, I'll say one of the things, for example, with Bitcoin Policy UK, and I'm sure they won't mind me saying this, but like when we launched, we had a barrage of people email us and volunteer and want to get involved in the company and help out and all this kind of stuff. Not one woman in all of the list. Yeah. And I thought that was really interesting. And I think it's for a number of reasons. I think women juggle a lot of things. They have kids, they have full-time jobs, they've got like aging parents they're looking after. There's like a whole suite of stuff that they're busy with. So they're very time restricted. And I also just think that they're less inclined to just jump into things in the way that men are. And for me, I discovered that I probably don't find that as very relatable because, as I know from my personality test, is I'm probably more male brained than female brained on the kind of bell curve. So yeah.
I think that's such an interesting point to think about, because I do think there are so many women, I think women creators, artists, people who are more in the expression community, as it were, or healing community, that are not necessarily excited about finance, math, logic, tech, any of it. It's all just gobbledygook, right? A lot of people, the minute you start about it, they're like, la, 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 la. And so unfortunately, they suffer as a result, and not having financial security and sovereignty. And I think
But this is one of the things I find fascinating about you, because I would put you firmly in the bucket of a creative. Like, you're very ethereal in like the way that you think and your demeanor, and yet you've just gone passionately down this rabbit hole. So to me, you're almost like not the archetypal woman that would come into this space. I mean, like, what was your trigger? Like, what was your orange pill?
well, I mean, I'm I've always been like, I love math. I'm good at math. I have an accounting degree. I worked at Deloitte and Touche for 2 seconds and just ended up hating it because I live on a sailboat instead and not wear pantyhose in an office. But just because you're good at something doesn't mean you should do it. Just, and so, but anyways, I've always, resonated with math and science. I'm certainly not some hardcore programmer or anything, but it's just something that is, I
You
like.
get it.
I get it. I like it. I'm interested. Right. And so I think, for me, just as, when I was learning about people and I was realizing like, oh, wow, I'm trying to do this whole like holistic wellness program and 11X and and it's been going on for, on and off for years, imposter syndrome. But the missing ingredient that was in this framework really was the money part. And I was just like, I was married for, almost 15 years, and my ex-husband and I started 2 companies together. He's still running them. And they were investment companies, and so I was like, this is cool, let's do it. But he was a great executor and I'm more of a visionary, like, here, let's go, la, la, la. So I have that in me, but I realized, I was like, wow, the money part needs to be in this framework a little bit more. And that's when I started wanting to learn about crypto and Bitcoin and more money and investing and stuff. And so really wanted, but once I started understanding the difference between Bitcoin and crypto, and once I really started understanding the human rights implications of Bitcoin, like listening to Alex Gladstein talking about Roya Maboob escaping, in the Afghanistan, all the stuff. And like, oh, you can start a whole new life if you can remember 12 words. And, you're not going to take your crappy authoritarian currency with you and be able to start a life as a refugee. And I was just like, oh,
Yeah.
this stuff, what is Bitcoin? And so when when those 2 dots, collided, that's when I realized, oh, what I need to learn about this, because all the
It's interesting actually, because I'm giving a talk at university in a few weeks' time, and I've been preparing it, and I've been looking at the sort of journey of like the financial journey that women have gone through history. And it's interesting because I think, we have a very sort of privileged position of like not having problems opening a bank account, generally speaking. I know obviously that's very much changing right now globally in the Western world, but generally speaking, like accessing a bank account for women is not that difficult, all this kind of stuff. But they're very recent events, even in the Western world, and if you look at the cycle of history of like women's financial rights, let's call them, they've gone through waves of like women having a lot of autonomy to suddenly not having so much to having more, and it's not a guarantee. And my conclusion really in this whole thing is that like Bitcoin is the only technology that really enforces those rights and prevents them from being taken away and given back in these kind of political cultural cycles, because we're sort of being buffeted around the whole time between sometimes we have more rights, sometimes we have less, and it's a constant shift. And I think it's the only technology that really allows women to say, well, do you know what, screw you, I have my money, I own it, I keep it, and I self-custody it, and like you say, I've got my 12 or 24 words in my head, and that's it. And you might be able to physically imprison me or stop me from moving or doing something, but the second I can leave, I can take all of that wealth with me. And I just think that, unfortunately, particularly younger Western women don't have a memory of when those things were how they were. I mean, like my mum, for example, I grew up in Italy, and when we moved to the UK when I was 9 years old, she told me that she wasn't able to open a bank account without my dad signing off on it. I think it was either that or to get a credit card. And I haven't been able to verify that, by the way. I've looked for like the actual like legislation that might have come in. I couldn't verify, but she said to me, when I went to a bank, they wouldn't give me a bank account unless your dad would sign the signature. And this was like 1985 or something, 1986 or whatever. Yeah, I mean, so we're not talking that long ago. I mean, the craziness of that when you think about it,
it's insane.
in living memory.
Well, think about, I think, and I haven't explored this more, but it's something that it's been on my mind. I'll be curious if any of the women in Access Tribe address this, but think about women who are in abusive relationships. If you're in an abusive relationship and you're like, I need to get myself and the kids out of here, I don't want to have my bank accounts frozen or get beaten up because I took some money out or whatever, right? And so as a tool, a safety net, for women to have their own property that is not exposed to this other person. But it does to me, because I always try to poke holes in everything. It's like, okay, well, what if he beats you up over the head and says, give me your 12 words? It's like, well, have a second set of 12 words, or whatever. Have your decoy stuff so that you can say, oh, sorry, here, you can have my $100 of Bitcoin or whatever, but have your real get out of abusive relationship or get out of abusive country. Like, I think that's something that, is important to talk about, and I think that it's a tool for people, whether it's a man or a woman, but certainly women in different types of situations where it's like, make sure you have your own safety net financially. Because a lot of times people, stay in relationships because of money. They feel trapped, they're moms, they're stay-at-home moms, the man is the breadwinner or whatever. And I was in that situation myself. And it was like, oh shit, like I gave away my sovereignty thinking like this is a partnership and we're going to be okay. But it started getting lopsided, violence happened. And then I was like, oh no, what do I do? I'm sure lots of people are like that,
Yeah.
So it's just, and it's you never think it's going to be you. You're like, I'm the strong badass. I'm the da, 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 da. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh shit, and it's just, I feel like Bitcoin can definitely be a tool to help people on that front as well, and
Yeah.
I'd be curious, has anybody talked about that in Access Tribe?
Yeah, I mean that's definitely one of the things that I'm delving into that I'm going to touch on the presentation as well, because it's I mean, there are all these like famous examples, like in Iran, where women who didn't want to wear the head covering had their bank accounts frozen. And, the same thing happened in Canada for people peacefully protesting about not wanting to be vaccinated. I mean, and I think for me, that was a massive orange pill, because I was already probably about 6 months into my journey with that, when that happened in Canada.
Yeah.
And it really just drove home to me how important it was to have that mechanism. Yeah, and I think it's just, gosh, it's so important. And it's so important because the mere fact that you can cross the border, you could be naked and walk across the border or walk out, and you can still have all your wealth in your head. And the power that that brings is just, it's really hard to overstate. I mean, for anybody, but women particularly often find themselves, to your point, in these situations where it's like things don't pan out the way that they should. And how much better to maybe come into a relationship where you have your 12 words that are your 12 private words that you never give up, and you have that ability to exit and take that wealth with you should the need arise. Maybe it never arises, but should the need arise, you have it, and you can pass that wealth on to your kids as well. And like all of these kind of options. So I just think that it's interesting to me, because I think a lot of women look at Bitcoin and they think of it as being risky. And I just think that the risky position right now is to not understand it and still be on zero. That is an extremely risky position to take. And to me, I think it's critical that women start to understand that, not understanding Bitcoin and not holding any Bitcoin and self-custodying it, you're basically being a wild cowboy land crazy person right now, because you're trusting centralized institutions to custody your wealth, your children's wealth. You're holding your wealth in a monetary system that has been systematically debased by extremely corrupt, and by the way, mostly men in global positions of power. And the idea that that is the sensible low risk option should at this point in where we are on the Bitcoin adoption and learning journey, it should just be so obvious to people, and it's not. And I just think that propaganda that says that Bitcoin is risky has been very effective, and congratulations to those that pushed it, because you've done a great job of preventing people that desperately need this technology from adopting it. But I think it's really incumbent on us to change that, and to make sure that women understand like that this is risk management, and not having counterparty risk is incredibly important. I'd say to anyone in financial markets, you understand counterparty risk, your entire organization is based around managing counterparty risk. So right now, if you're holding fiat and your wealth is in fiat and that's all you have extremely high counterparty risk of the unknown. But the known is that it's being debased by like 5, 10, 20%, every year. So, I mean, even leaving aside like what the unknowns are, the knowns are, would you want to hold an asset that gets debased that much? Because that's what you're doing, right? So anyway, ran over.
Things that got me orange pilled too was they said, I think during 18 months during COVID, like 40% of the money supply, or they printed 40 extra percent. And I was just like, wait a minute, let me do that math here. You mean my purchasing power went down by that? What happened? I don't get it. And so that's when I really wanted to start to understand. So all these little, the light bright things started coming on. And I want people to really get it. And I think what's interesting about, Bitcoin's for everyone. Everybody can participate. That's what's so cool. You don't need permission. You don't need to go fill out an application and get approved, but I think the sentiment of the women that I meet are very, we are highly compassionate creatures. That's just our nature, and we want to I think men want to make the world better too, but there's a lot of the like, oh, you get it when you get it, and you get it at the price you deserve, and all this kind of stuff. And I'm just sort of like,
have fun staying poor.
You got it. That's funny. Haha. But at the same time, like, I'm very much in the camp of like, I want to be surrounded by health. I want to be surrounded by people who are educated. I want to be surrounded by prosperity. So selfishly, I want everybody to get Bitcoin so that the whole world is better and we don't have to look around at every little corner and see suffering, see pain, see all the things that are avoidable. All of these things are, I believe, avoidable in the world. And Bitcoin is one of the tools that can help us avoid catastrophic suffering, and I think women are so, we do want to support. I'm not that men don't, and I love all of you guys, but some of just that kind of soup of the sarcasm can be a bit off-putting to some of the women. Like, I've been in spaces, I haven't been in spaces for a little bit, but I was in spaces a lot in the beginning, and I would notice some women would come in and they would just ask a question because they're new, they don't know. And then they would just get pounced by some smart ass. And I'm just like, and I would DM them after, and I'm like, I'm really sorry that happened, and they're just like, this is why I don't want to do Bitcoin, because people are assholes, and I'm just like, ah. So in addition to the FUD on the outside, we do have a problem on the inside of, people getting too snarky, with new people.
Yeah, and I think it's also a lot to take in. I mean, it's an avalanche of information when it's like, it was Louis C.K. put this tweet out a while ago, and I literally, I must have laughed for about an hour when I read it. It was something like he said, like, Bitcoiners are like the Mormons of currency. It doesn't matter how many times you tell them you're not interested, they show up with a smile on their face time and time again, asking you to change your whole world view. And I just thought it was like the funniest thing because it was so true. I literally just could not stop laughing. It was hilarious. But and I think that's part of the problem, isn't it? It's like when you go really down that when you've gone down the rabbit hole, you've changed a whole worldview, you're questioning everything. It's like separation, money and state, it all just becomes a bit much. And if you're coming new into that space, it's just like, whoa, this is all a bit too intense for me, and what the heck. And I think it's interesting, again, to your point. I mean, I worked in an interdealer broker, which is basically like Wolf on Wall Street. I think there were like 3 girls on a trading floor of like 400 men or something. And so to me, when I came into Bitcoin space, I didn't find that environment like problematic. And I really struggled to understand why other people did, because I was like, this is just people bantering and having fun. And the British sense of humor tends to be quite cutting, it's quite edgy, it's not as politically correct as it is in the US. And so for me, I just kind of was like, I don't get why everyone's so upset by this. But I think you're absolutely right. I think for a lot of women, it's just like they just want to be able to ask questions without having somebody scream at them, have fun staying poor, you ignorant, whatever.
Right. And they already feel, there's a lot of, not everybody, of course, I can't speak for the whole world, but like, if you're not in the financial space, you already sort of feel at a huge disadvantage, and sort of, like, I'm down here, and so to have that energy on top of it, it's like it could be, off-putting for quite a while. And I'm just like, screw this. I'm not coming back to this, ridiculous,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
so I think, obviously there's a place for all of us to get, our engagement with new people. Some people are interested in it because of the human rights stuff. Some people are interested in it because of sustainable energy opportunities, and look, we can capture methane and turn it, like that's a whole wonderful sector that I'm excited to really, promote and dive into here.
Isn't it crazy as well? This is one of the things that I just find sort of somewhat mystical about Bitcoin, is that it's almost like it doesn't matter who you are or what you do in life. There's some aspect of it that is just so relevant to you. Like, you're an environmentalist. Oh, okay, it's the best technology we have to mitigate carbon emissions, like without a doubt. And this is what I say to people. I mean, I'm probably a little bit on the climate skeptic side in the sense that I believe in having a clean environment. I'm not quite as like crazy person about like we have to limit carbon because that's a problem. I'm somewhat unconvinced by some of that narrative. But what I say to people is like, if you subscribe to that narrative, then you absolutely have to admit that Bitcoin mining is the solution for it. And therefore, if you tell me that you're a climate activist, but you're against Bitcoin mining, one of those things is not true,
Right. Well, and the truth is they haven't done the research.
Right.
That's it. There's the ego that's blocking them from, because they've gotten exposed to all the FUD and the Greenpeace nonsense and whatever's going on out there. They've allowed that to be their worldview, their story. And then when they get presented with this other thing that's contrary, it's kind of like, wait a minute, how can this thing that I'm, I've been told is so bad and boiling the oceans be a solution? Right. And so
Yeah,
it's,
and I mean, look, I mean, I think as well that, I mean, yes, and so I mean, there's the piece about the methane capture that is indisputable, and the fact that you can create value through renewable energy sources, and if you want to create renewable energy sources, you can use Bitcoin mining in order to support the creation of that infrastructure, which is difficult to stand up. But then there's also the points that Jeff Booth makes, which are really just completely indisputable. A fiat-based economy that requires inflation requires more stuff to be produced more cheaply, in greater volumes to sustain itself on an ongoing basis. And therefore, the whole incentive structure for companies and for people is just more stuff, more stuff, more stuff. Well, I mean, obviously that's going to pollute the environment. And you'll notice that Bitcoiners walk around with, funnily enough, like holes in all of their clothes. And just don't subscribe to this idea of just needing more things. And it changes that mindset. And I mean, gosh, if you're an environmentalist, that's surely got to be like one of the most important things that you should care about, right?
I think it's super important. And I think I've had my eyes opened a lot lately. Like I said, I've been going to a couple different, I went to New York Climate Week, London Climate Week. I was just at Bloom and Verge up in San Jose last week. And so these are all, climate and nature related conferences, obviously. And there's still so much shit coinery out there that everyone's like, well, we're going to go build the carbon offset things and put them on the blockchain. And we're going to, go do the eco blockchain, and it's not going to use any energy, and it's going to have zero footprint and da, 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 da. And so, the marketing departments of all these crapto, projects.
Oh, I love that. Crapto. That's such a great word. Can we make that a thing?
Crapto for sure.
Cryptocurrency. Oh my God. Can we make that a thing?
But they're convincing, right? And then they pull in some of the stuff and they misquote, and they'll pull in that Mora et al. Paper that's wrong about the energy and Bitcoin and all the stuff. And so it's just basically like, oh my God, like the pool of misinformation and noise, in order for us to get the signal through it's vast, right? And it just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger because these, crypto companies, they have an incentive to want to like get their product out there to people, and then they'll get rug pulled and everyone will still, like, you would think that after FTX and all of the stuff that's going down and people would wake up, but the human's propensity to greed, this time
Yeah. I think that, and I just think that the propaganda machine is so well funded and so effective. I mean, I'm still astounded where like I talk to people about just world events, and they'll sort of say to me this and this, and I'm like, are you still watching the BBC or reading the New York Times and you think that this stuff is actual news? And I'm like, you do realize that these are just propaganda organizations. Like, they're not, what you're getting is some version of the truth, some kernels of truth, in with a great big dollop of like framing that comes with it. And I'm still astounded that like after 3 years of COVID and all of the like nonsense that's come to light, that people still think that when they open a newspaper, like, this stuff is factual. I'm like, good Lord, like, I know we don't have all time to like go and do research and dive deep into topics that we're not familiar with or we don't have expertise in, but just maybe start by not accepting that just because you read something in a mainstream newspaper that it's true. Like, that's a good starting point. Say, I read this, it could be true, it might not be true. I shall reserve judgment until I have more information,
It's fascinating. The people, like, still people in my family and circle, oh, COVID was just a thing and I'm getting my boosters and I'm doing the whole,
Oh God.
I trust the government and I trust the doctors, whatever the CDC says I'm doing. And I'm just like, okay, you can't. And this is, I think I look at our consciousness as a society in terms of concentric circles. Like, how far away are you from the truth? Like, the truth being the center. And obviously truth can be subjective and objective, right? And so, but it's kind of this, like, the further away you are, it's just, I want to focus closer to the people who are interested truly in the truth, the rebels, and who don't accept any of this crap at face value, and the circles next to it. It's like when you go out here and you're trying to have these conversations with the normies and the zombies, and I love you guys with my heart, but I just can't. It's like you're hitting your head on the wall,
It's very bizarre. I mean, it feels a bit like, you're paying a visit to the asylum and trying to have like a reasonable conversation with the lunatics. I mean, that's how it feels. And I find it astounding. It's interesting how you say like the rebels, but it's like, isn't it crazy that we live in a time where telling the truth is a revolutionary act?
Yeah. Right. And they get punished for telling the truth. Like, you look at different people who are who was it? Dr. Mercola,
Oh God, who got debanked? Yes.
So you're just like, what? So all of these things that keep happening to people who are willing to speak the truth and show truth, show evidence, and they're getting deplatformed, they're getting censored, their bank accounts get shut down, all the nonsense. And it's like, this is why I'm so passionate. And I don't want to let those powers that be with the strings win. Like, they need to lose. That system needs to go bye-bye, and this new system of truth needs to, it's transparent system.
I mean, I think I'm not saying that I managed to do this, but I do like Jeff Booth's approach to it, where he's just like focus on building the world that you want to see. And I think that's very good advice, because I tend to get very caught up sometimes in like moments of anger where I also just find a lot of this stuff boring. I'm like, look, if you're advocating for censorship, history has been abundantly clear that the censors are never the good guys. So go and advocate for that all you want, but like, just the rest of us aren't interested in existing in your dystopian, horrible little limited, sad world. Have it, like, knock yourself out, but don't demand that everybody else be a part of that, because there are many of us that are just interested in having deep conversations, exchanging ideas with people we disagree with, learning through that process, coming to truth through the process of debate, of open debate. And we have no interest in existing in your censorship, bland ecosystem. But you are very welcome to it if that's what you want. Somebody gave a very good solution the other day. They were talking about like social media, and I mean, X is obviously a little bit more kind of free speech now than it was, but it obviously is still subject to like shadow banning and all the various things that are going on. And I think this is absolutely right. Somebody was saying that the way that social media algorithms should work is that you should be able to decide how you want to consume the data on there. You should be able to decide who you want. I mean, for example, on Twitter, I spend a lot of time just muting words I don't want to hear. When my feed gets full of stuff where I'm like, I'm just not interested in this topic and I'm sick of it being amplified, I just start to like mute all of the words that come up in that. And I'd love having the ability to do that, but it should be much easier to do. And it should be completely like under your control, what you do and don't see. And this is one of the reasons why I think that Nostr is going to win, either that protocol or a better version of it, because the sheer positive user experience that you have, where one, you can decide what you see in your feed and it's not being manipulated. And two, the interoperability, where I can just keep my whole network of people that I'm connected with, and I just shift from one UI to another, depending on what service they're providing. That to me is the kind of user experience I want. I don't have any interest in X or Meta or the government telling me what they think I should hear and in what context and form I should hear it. I will make that decision. And I'm perfectly capable of muting accounts and content or unfollowing them if I'm not interested in what they have to say, and like that surely should be my choice.
Good. And I think obviously you think of the, multi-billion-dollar ad industry, that survives on the backs of all of these, centralized social media companies. So you're in this, like, they're the ones obviously in the government too, collaborating with what poison is getting fed to our minds, this awfulness. And so it really is, I think it's incumbent upon us as individuals who wish to be free and sovereign to remember, like, it's not just about, what you're putting in your mouth, it's what you're putting in your ears, it's every, this consumption model is so important. And so for us to be diligent and guarded with it is important, instead of just, okay, I trust them, and I'm guilty of it.
Yeah. I mean, look, I think just maybe as a closing thought, I just realized, sorry, we've gone way over time. But to me, I feel like right now we're walking through the fire. So right now feels pretty horrible. Everything feels very amped up. We feel like we're on the brink of World War III. But I would say, like, as a message of hope, and I think you believe this too, is I think we're walking through the fire right now, but I think what is on the other side is abundantly optimistic and positive and nourishing. And I think we are on the cusp of getting there. This is just the journey of shedding the old and that kind of transformation into the new. So I am incredibly optimistic about the future. I really am. I actually think that humanity is about to take off on a fantastic trajectory of innovation and positivity and a healthy relationship with itself. But I just think right now it's like the chaos of destruction, the dancing Shiva and the everything kind of being destroyed in order to kind of clear the way for the new. So that's kind of, I guess, where I am in my headspace.
I know, because it is easy to get sucked into the doom and gloom. And I think, Bitcoin as a beacon of hope in this community, and the spirit of the community is very, very positive, because it's not just airy fairy. That's the thing. Like, I loved the whole Woodstock generation and all the meditators and all the freaks and the psychedelics. Yay, let's go. However, it didn't have the teeth and the traction. And like Bitcoin is the thing that can merge, that consciousness of revolution with here's the real tools, right? And so
you're right, exactly. It has teeth. And by the way, I just want to say thank you for like all of the beautiful kind of positive messages that you've been putting out on social media, because you've been really like an anomaly, I think, in people's, the sort of feed that I see, and the kind of statements that come out of just reminding people of like the bigger picture and the positivity and the love and the humanity and things like that. And I'll say, actually, I'd say maybe that's I won't speak for myself because I don't think my feed looks like yours, but there have been women like yourself, and also I've noticed like Natalie Smolenski, a different kind of angle, but she's been putting out some very thoughtful pieces just about the structure of society and like, the transition that we're going through and things like that. And it's interesting that that feminine voice, at least maybe based on what I'm more focused on now, but it's being amplified, and it's a very positive, constructive, building mindset.
I love it. Yeah. And thank you for like bringing all the women together and really like using your talents, gifts that you have accumulated over the decades in TradFi, right? And in leadership development, and saying, okay, how can I I overlay this in this wonderful community and support women coming on board, and
Yeah.
just coming on board, but the women who are here, it's like, how do we cultivate ourselves as business women and as leaders and as philanthropists, entrepreneurs, whatever we are, right? And so how do we get to accelerate and excel in life, so you're putting that together. And
It's my humble little contribution, as Jeff said, we're all nodes, aren't we, on the network? We're all doing our little piece. So yeah, that's how I like to think of it. And there are a lot of female nodes out there, as I've discovered, just maybe less vocal. So it's nice to kind of connect with them all and really just have a chance to have conversations like this,
yeah, it's so important. And I think we're just scratching the surface. So I'm really excited to keep, supporting and learning more about what you're doing. And I know I signed up and I didn't do all the stuff. So I have a lot of back work to do listening.
By the way, I have another yoga teacher that somebody's put me in touch with. So I was like, I think we should at least aim for a once a month Bitcoin yoga / meditation session. I think we'll definitely do that. But yes, let me know when you've got a free slot, because I think having a bit of the DJ Valerie B. Love Bitcoin yogic energy would be awesome.
I would love it. Okay, so where can people find you?
So website is accesstribe.com. If you're interested in applying to join the platform, it's accesstribe.com/join. I think you get a 15% discount at the moment. It's $80 a year membership, but you get 15% off with code JOIN, all capital letters, if you want to sign up for that. And my podcast is on YouTube, which is just at AccessTribe, like youtube.com/@AccessTribe. Oh gosh, I mean, my social media handles are, so Instagram is access_tribe, Facebook is AccessTribe Bitcoin, and then I think just on LinkedIn it's the same. Just look up AccessTribe and you'll find me. I think that's it. And Twitter, the X is @AccessTribe. And my personal account is at Bitcoin Krista, but I don't suggest people follow that. It's usually just me ranting about stuff in the world. I have this little post-it that sits on my mirror. It says, "You do not need to respond." I ignore it. But it's there.
That on mine too. I've gotten accidentally Velcroed into so many conversations, and it was like, what am I doing? No, this is unnecessary Velcro into someone else's drama.
Yeah.
Oh, I love it. That's so good. What's one thing you want to say, closing thought, to somebody who is listening to this, who maybe is skeptical, on the fence? How can a new person, dip their toe into Bitcoin?
Well, I would say that, like everything you've ever dreamed of, Bitcoin is the enabler. So first and foremost, study Bitcoin. And I would strongly suggest that people study it before they do anything else. And I would also say that your riskiest position right now is zero. So just get off zero if you can possibly do it in any way. That would be my messages.
I love it. That's perfect. Well, I love you and I appreciate you so much. And thank you so much for being on the first episode of the rebrand of Bitcoin for Peace. Yay.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on, and just thank you for everything that you're doing. I deeply appreciate it. So thank you for being in my life.
Yeah, you too. Thank you, sister. All right, I'm going to stop recording. Yay.